to the next episode of the Enterprise AI Adoption Playbook. We're here with Allen from Lattice. He's going to introduce himself in a second. Thank you guys for tuning in. To start with, Allen, tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robin. My name is Allen Jeter, and I've been with Lattice for about a year and a half. I'm the director of IT. I've been in IT for the last 12 to 13 years, really managing enterprise security and helping companies kind of scale their internal IT operations. And so really my sweet spot in companies is kind of that 200 to 500 kind of scale when they're really going through rapid growth. And yeah, I've really enjoyed it and happy to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. Most of the audience will probably know who Lattice are, but there'll probably be some that don't. So for those that don't, we'd love to get like your kind of quick distillation of what you guys do.
Yeah, we are a people-powered platform where we're trying to drive better performance management, as well as just building really awesome teams using human-feeling products. So enhancing performance reviews, driving better one-on-one conversations, and generally just kind of managing that human layer of interactions that every company goes through.
That's so awesome. I love your product, by the way. Really, really love Lattice product. So the goal of the show basically is to just talk to folks who are actually responsible for like making this AI revolution actually happen in real life, right? I think everyone has this sense that we like have this incredible technology, and there's a sort of intuitive sense that people have that it's going to be very revolutionary, it's going to be very transformative, but somehow the like sort of steps in between you first get your hands on, you know, the technology itself to, okay, like now my enterprise like actually operates very, very differently. Yeah. Those steps are very unclear and mysterious to people. Yeah. So I think, you know, what I love doing is just bringing people on who are like actually making that transition happen in real life. Yeah. And just kind of helping talk through like, how do you make that transition? If you're, you know, the director of IT at Lattice and, you know, the CEO of Lattice comes to you and says, we should be doing more with AI, right?
Yeah.
What do you do?
What do I do? They have.
Yeah,
really
exactly.
Have. Well, one thing that I should give context in, one of my passions is, you know, where technology meets business problems and solves business problems. And if you do it right, the process or system you put in place will outlive you. Right. The Spotifys will probably be around long after I'm gone. And so being able to drive that kind of change and innovation internally at organizations is what I thrive on. And I love doing that. And so when the CEO did come to me and ask, how are we kind of building an AI strategy to kind of uplift our operations and really uplift where we are as a company, I was like, put me in, coach.
Love it.
I definitely agree with kind of what you're saying is initially, let's call it 12 months ago, there was a lot of hype around AI. Yeah. And AI is just even very simplistic in general. There's LLMs, machine learning, there's, you know, all of these other kind of interfaces through AI. And I think for us, the ability to leverage kind of NLP dynamics where I can talk to a system and it can give me information back.
So powerful.
Was a very powerful value prop for us.
Really fair.
And so being able to bridge the non-technical workers on our team to be able to extract specific data and insights the same way, let's say, a data engineer or a machine learning scientist would be able to, was very intriguing. Yeah. And so there was a lot of experimentation early on.
Right, makes sense. What kind of experiments like were you running? How are you thinking about even choosing what experiments to run?
Yeah, initially we tried to build our own chatbot. So we saw a lot of offerings. The product offerings were dense. We're talking thousands of AI solutions. And so
crazy, isn't it?
It really was. And so we tried building one internally, and we did. We definitely did. I wouldn't consider it scalable, but we created essentially a front end where you could ask questions. It would pass that on to OpenAI. It would then give you an answer. Right. It was kind of V1. V2 was adding RAG. So adding a vector database into it. Right. Taking your business data converting it into your vector database, and then providing parts of that vector database as context to your query to OpenAI.
What were the sources of data? Like what departments, what types of problems, what types of questions are you hoping people could ask of that system?
Yeah, our two primary use cases were our people panel.
Yep.
So our people team answers a lot of questions for our employees, and is kind of the life force in terms of supporting them. There's going to be critical life questions that people need answers to.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an HR team that's ready and available to service those, then it can be a true detriment to people's lives. And so the thought behind building an AI chatbot for the people team was this 24/7 service that could consume all of the data and internal kind of FAQs that we have about how we operate, our benefits, all of that, and be this kind of pseudo people ops person that can answer questions 24/7.
That's amazing. I'm curious, how did you go through the process of picking that people ops use case? Because I think a lot of companies just kind of get stuck either too early where they're like, let's just do AI, and then it's like, well, wait, what are the use cases for this thing again? Or they spend too much time trying to pick through all of the super specific use cases and do a prioritization matrix of the 2,000 different use cases you could do. I'm curious, you guys moved really quickly, and I think that was really awesome. How did you pick the use case and get it into, get a POC working so quickly?
One of the initial metrics in our very early days was driving down manual work, and kind of building a metric of essentially response time as part of that, how long it took a human to respond versus an automation or an AI to respond. And so really that was our main goal. To free up the team to do other work while this bot answered questions and kind of replaced them. And so that was our first metric. We applied that to the people bot.
Got it.
As well as the security bot.
So did you guys pick the people bot because you believed that that would be the place where you could get the biggest kind of reduction in manual effort?
We did.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Really cool.
We were right on the target with that. And since we've actually expanded bots to other teams as well, and we've seen the same kind of benefit as well. So not just localized to the people bot, the IT team is now using the Creedle bot for first responses as well. And other parts of the business are kind of following suit. It's really this paradigm shift with operating from kind of a reactive state as a team to moving towards more of a proactive state. And yeah, I'm happy to have been a small part of that for Lattice's journey.
I mean, Alan, you were definitely not a small part of that. You drove it from beginning to end, which is really, really cool. You guys did the POC. Am I remembering correctly that you built that initial POC on Okta workflows?
We did.
Nice. Yeah. I remember that.
We built it within Okta workflows. I want to say our vector database was in Pinecone. And so we connected some of the Pinecone APIs into Okta workflows API. We connected that to OpenAI's APIs. And what we found was it works.
Really cool.
But it doesn't work at scale, which is fine. And so that kind of led us into looking for a third-party solution.
Cool.
And so along that kind of development process, we started learning some really cool things. One was using Slack data. So right in the early stages, I would say about 12 months ago or so, Slack AI was introduced. And so Slack their sales team reached out, they were really championing Slack AI. And they're like, it will index all of your Slack data from your channels. You will get the answer that you need wherever it is. It will solve all of your problems. And we're like, okay, we're listening. And then the price tag moment came out. And it was essentially 200% what we're paying for current list. And so my procurement team was like, well, that's not really an option at this point. And so that actually kind of widened our requirements on what we were looking for in terms of this enterprise AI solution. Like, well, we don't want to go with Slack AI, but we do want to tap into that Slack data.
Totally makes sense.
So whatever solution this is, we need to be able to have that integration.
That makes a ton of sense. It's sort of funny because I've heard a version of that story from so many different customers. There's a component of it which is okay, this is a Salesforce product, so obviously the price tag is going to be kind of comical. But there's also just it's a Salesforce product, so the extent to which like Salesforce is a true like product company these days is like kind of I don't want to get too controversial on the podcast, but like it's like, you know, kind of a debate. And I think we've seen a lot of customers actually try Slack AI and like, hey, we're going to attempt to roll this out. And then when you actually grapple with the reality of like what the use cases are, it turns out that the sort of like default thing to do of like, let's just slap AI on top of our existing product, it actually doesn't solve the use case all that well, because there's a bunch of workflow and there's a bunch of nuance and there's a bunch of complexity that, you know, isn't fully captured in the sort of naive, let's just whack AI on the existing product.
100%.
And I think like in the early days of AI, I heard this a lot where people were like, oh, the incumbents will be at such a huge advantage because like they have the existing distribution and like they'll just win. And that was like very much the narrative, right? Like Adobe came out with their like, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but their AI for Adobe. And everyone was like, wow, they implemented this so fast. Like the incumbents are going to win on everything. And then what we've seen over time is if you look at people's AI like product usage, how many products do you actually use the AI components for where you were using that product before, let's say, 2022?
Right.
And the answer is it's almost zero, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've seen a big reversal of that mindset where before it was like the incumbent's going to win everything. And now you're seeing, okay, people are realizing that there's actually real product work that needs to happen to make these use cases actually work well.
Absolutely. And those use cases are going to be a little bit different for every organization. So this idea of a one size golden shoe fits all, right, is not really going to scale.
Right.
And so we started to realize that early on as well. In talking with some other vendors, we started asking some like very pointed questions.
Nice.
So like, how would this work with this specific data type or this problem? And you know, we were told, well, don't worry about that. We'll figure it out when we get there.
Right.
Or what underlying model does this use?
Right.
Oh, don't worry about that. It's an in-house baked model. And so some of these were just red flags initially. And we were like, well, we definitely don't want to be locked into a singular model.
Right.
We definitely want to be able to tap into various business data sources. And we kind of want to have the flexibility where anyone can use this. Even non-technical folks can use this platform. Yeah, we continued on our search. I think coming back to that evaluation period, one of the other products we looked at was Stack AI.
Right.
Which brilliant team, by the way.
I love the Stack team. They were in our YC batch, actually. So I like those guys.
Great folks. And yeah, we were able to kind of get another POC of this Slack-based AI agent built out in their platform.
Cool.
It used Slack data. You could query that Slack data and get answers. What we found challenging was in deploying it to non-technical teams. IT was going to own the management of it. Right. And we saw this problem quickly starting to get bigger as more teams would utilize it. And so that was kind of a limiter to us kind of fully adopting Stack AI. And we kind of paused on that evaluation and started pursuing other products. And so that's kind of when we landed on Creedle. And so
love to hear it, obviously. I am curious, like, you know, one of the things that people struggle with is just like discovery of the products, right? The AI space is so big. You know, I live in New York and flew down to California recently to meet a few customers. And I was driving down the 101 from Palo Alto into SF. And oh boy, the billboards, it's like enterprise AI this, enterprise AI that, customer support AI, like Salesforce AI. Literally every single product is AI. Every company that sold SaaS like a year ago is now selling AI. I mean, how do you cut through the noise and figure out like which of these vendors are like actually people that I should speak to versus the like long tail of a million people telling you that they have the AI solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a lot of it is having high requirements just off the jump and knowing those requirements. A little bit of luck. And I would say equal parts just passion and curiosity from people looking for the products. I happened to stumble onto Creedle based on a blog post that you posted. And funny enough, you were describing the journey of most enterprises in their AI adoption curve. And so great blog post,
Thank
by
you
the way.
very
I
much.
would implore anyone watching this to go take a read on it.
I'll link it in the comments and in the podcast section so you guys can read.
And in it, you kind of have this graph which goes to kind of a hockey stick trajectory.
Right.
And in the beginning, you say enterprises are starting to experiment. You're dabbling with some AI solutions, but you haven't really done much. Fast forward about 6-7 months, and you're starting to actually implement it into some use cases. And then kind of the hockey puck curve, you are actually fully productionizing it. It is within the operational workflow. Exactly. And so that was spot on. That was exactly what we're doing. And we were experimenting. I think a lot of teams were.
Right.
But then I realized kind of the author, you, had a AI company called Creedle, where you're solving some of these problems. And so earlier on Creedle's website, you were very subtle about what Creedle did. And so I wanted to set up a demo as soon as I could.
Cool.
And I think the first demo that I saw of the platform, of Copilots, being able to integrate into Google, being able to integrate into Jira and Slack, it was just that aha moment.
Cool.
Where I said, we found it.
Nice.
This is the one.
Yeah, I remember coming out of that call and being like, yeah, this is like perfect. I'm gonna totally like transform this enterprise, and they're gonna get just so much value out of the product. And it's so exciting as a founder when you meet a customer where you know like your product is the perfect fit for what they need. It's just like, yes, like a come to Jesus moment, basically.
I call these win-win-wins.
Right.
Moments where you can line up where the customer gets a win, where the founder gets a win, where it's a win for the overall kind of business and the market. And so yeah, really looking for those win-win-wins. I think fast forward a couple months, we were able to really implement it quickly and knock out some of those first two use cases, which was the people bot and then the security bot.
Yeah. How did you land on the security bot as a use case?
It's a great question. Our security team is lean but mighty. And what they were experiencing was a lot of sales folks coming to them, passing down questions from customers about various security requirements or questionnaires. And a lot of the time, these were repetitive questions.
Yeah, I bet.
Where, a week ago, someone on security staff answered something exactly the same.
Right.
To the point where they would just share their response from a week prior. So in nature, they're doing a lot of the same answering of these questions. So it kind of clicked on our head that if we can reduce the time for our sales team to come back to the customers with the right answers from the security team, we can drive more deals and close deals quicker. And so that was primarily the success criteria for us deploying the security.
Really, really cool. And then one of the things that I think you guys did really well, actually, for the security copilot was you thought really rigorously about how to quantify the value, because I think a lot of customers are like, oh, it's cool that I can deploy AI on my data and like my team can like ask questions and get responses. But then they take that to their bosses, the CEO or the CFO. And the CFO is like, well, so what? Like, why should I care about this? I think one thing you guys did really well was think through, especially for the security bot, like, how do I quantify this in a way that the CFO will like, really care?
Absolutely. And that's kind of coming back to this idea that there's no one size AI solution that fits all. You're really going to have to understand your business needs and the problems that your business is experiencing, pinpoint those, and then work backwards from that. And so that was a problem that I quickly identified with the security team. They're a small team. We partner with them a lot. And so it was a little bit in our interest to support them. If they can work more efficiently, then they could support us a little bit more efficiently as well.
And so did they come to you with being like, hey, I wish I could use AI for this? Did you like sort of see this process in their workflow and you were like, hey, I wonder if you could use AI for this? Like literally, tactically, how did that work?
So it was us kind of coming to them. It was us saying, hey, we spotted this opportunity. We see a lot of the same questions getting answered by your team. Really cool. And this is something that we think we could kind of line up and hopefully solve in perpetuity. They were bought in immediately. They're, say less is the exact term they said. And yeah, they then moved to the POC. There was rigorous testing in collaboration with them during the POC, some fine tuning, but I think with that, it perfected the end result
Really
that much better.
I think that's one of the things that people don't understand, actually, is that, or at least the market doesn't necessarily have a good grip on this, which is that it's actually really easy to get a demo of this to answer like 30% or 40% of your questions right. And so you go into the sales demo and the sales guy is like, okay, like, look, I'm going to show you this demo. It's like a pre-canned question that I've rehearsed 24 times. I asked the question, the answer is perfect. Wow, like, looks great. Let's buy this. And then what happens is in real life, the questions are a little bit different, right? Because the user misspells like a critical word a third of the time, and they don't know exactly how to frame the question, or, you know, the real world is messy, right?
Absolutely.
And so the reality is to go from 30% to 99% is actually a lot of this kind of, how do you inject the subject matter expertise of the security team into the overall behavior of the system such that you get 99% of the answers right instead of like the 30% that are easy to demo, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and part of that is thorough documentation.
Yep.
The more, the better.
Yep.
All of these large language models are trained on kind of generic data sets out in the world.
Right.
None of those data sets actually understand your internal policies, rules, and what you have set up. And so we were very fortunate that our security team had a robust library of documentation that they've kept. And so the mission there was essentially tapping into those, connecting it into the Copilot, and then doing some testing just to validate our assumptions that this is going to answer correctly. And it quickly got into that 99% accuracy very quickly once we were able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I loved about the way that your security team approached the problem was that, you know, there were obviously things that the AI couldn't answer at first, right? And rather than sort of throwing your hands up and say, okay, we're stuck, what do we do? It's like, let's work with the platform to try and figure out, like, why is this breaking down, right? And there was a lot of like, okay, so we have this really robust documentation here, but the users are sometimes referring to, like, they're misspelling SOC 2 as SOCK 2 instead of SOC 2, because the seller doesn't necessarily know what the right name of the compliance certification is, right? So coaching the AI on how to understand that, identifying the areas in the documentation that, like, you know, maybe could be improved, because at the end of the day, like, the amount of documentation you can have is infinite. And the security team have to be responsible about how much of their time do we spend writing like the perfect documentation for everything, right? And being able to figure out, okay, what are the users asking for? And how do I focus on creating the documentation and creating the content that actually serves the need that the users actually have, right? And they were just so pragmatic and so practical about doing that they got to production so quickly. And that was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of what you were mentioning just around that process was getting familiar with prompts. And I think, you know, we all kind of became novice prompt engineers over using this product. And it's very important. I would say prompt engineering is critical to any chatbot success. Coming back to the NLP dynamic of AI, rather than having code influencing the way an app works now, we have literal English, which will influence the way your app works. And at first, it doesn't really click with people. They get it in theory, but not in practice. And I think through training the security bot, you know, don't respond to SOC, spelled S-O-C-K versus SOC 2. Once they were comfortable with that, they quickly were able to gear it exactly to the responses that they wanted. But it was definitely a learning curve for a lot of the teams going through that, but just very critical.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, like, one of the things that's important here is that the tooling has to help people do this, right? And I think if you just give someone a chatbot and you say, like, go figure out the prompt engineering component yourself, it's like really, really hard, actually. And so having a way to test different prompts, to evaluate what's working, to sort of see what types of questions are working, what types of questions are not working, massively accelerates the process to production.
It really does,
Really cool. Okay, sweet. So that was the people bot and then the security bot. One of the things that is also interesting, I think a lot of our audience struggle with this as well, is, you know, you're a large enterprise, right? You have a lot of data from, you know, enormous, very data sensitive organizations. How do you think about approaching, you know, the obvious productivity gains to be realized with AI? How do you think about achieving that in the context of like having a responsible AI program that protects your customers' like privacy and data security and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, compliance is paramount.
Right.
Right. Our customers give us trust in
Yep.
their data.
Yep.
And so it's really on us to maintain that trust
Yep.
and maintain privacy through our compliance systems and the usage of that. And so we have a VP of compliance at Lattice, and we take it very seriously.
Right.
And that the individual is actually part of the early on discussions
Right.
as we rolled out Cradle.
Right.
We were very intentional about using models that weren't trained on the data that we put through it. We were very intentional about what attributes of the data that we're using we would actually flow into some of these co-pilots.
Right.
But overall, we had that approach before AI and before LLMs,
Totally.
which actually benefited us even more. We kind of had this segregation around sensitive data already in place.
Really cool.
So that when we rolled out Cradle, it was really just maintaining that same perimeter and framework, and then just scaling that over to Cradle as well.
Really cool.
But yeah, to answer your question kind of plainly, it's really focusing on the compliance. It's having a specific subject matter expert in your organization
Makes sense.
that's owning that and is leading that. And it's so important. I think this idea of move fast and break things, right?
Right.
Yeah, maybe as a startup, but once you start working at an enterprise scale or you're in HIPAA kind of regulated industries, you don't want to move fast and break things.
Right.
You want to kind of move fast, ensure privacy, and scale.
Right.
And so that's really been a focus for Lattice early on since kind of its inception. And we've really carried that through our adoption of Cradle. And then kind of the cherry on top that Cradle had is you have some kind of limited DLP functionality where you can identify various internal or sensitive information through your platform and just stop that from going anywhere. And so we do leverage that, the defaults in place, which I think cut down on specific PII. If someone was to maybe, let's say, drop their social security number there or something like that, we do have those protections in place as a default, just to protect folks as well.
100%, yeah. I think one of the things that's been really interesting to me and sort of counterintuitive is that when you add these sorts of protections, it actually increases adoption. It doesn't decrease adoption. Because one of the big things that stops people using the technology is just like fear that they're going to like do something wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you can tell people like, look, the guardrails that we need are like built into the platform that you're using. It's not all just like you have to memorize these like 27 rules about what you are and aren't allowed to do. You can just use the platform and the guardrails are like mostly there for you. That actually allows them to kind of get more creative and just try and see if it works rather than having to be like, oh, I'm scared of using this tool because what if I accidentally like, you know, do a query that's naughty and like Alan tells me off, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of want to, and this is just part of IT, is building systems and pathways for your users, but ensuring there's guardrails around it too. A great metaphor I could use is, you know, if you have a water park and a super tall slide, but to get up there, there's no railings on the side and people could fall off. Like, I don't think a lot of people want to take that ride for pure fear of even getting there. But if you can put up the right guardrails, create the right paved road, people will use that process. Inversely, if people are just using a process with no guardrails, there is kind of the scary side of that on, you know, breaking compliance or a security breach or a risk.
100%.
And so, yeah, this is something that every day I'm thinking about kind of how can we establish those guardrails in a sense where it's not a blocker, but more supporting our workforce.
100%. One of the things that we hear about a lot in this regard is like the permissions of the underlying data, right? So you talked a little bit about the POC that you guys built where you're like loading a bunch of data up into Pinecone and then you're like querying Pinecone. And I think if you're doing stuff where all the data is like, you know, internal public, so anyone at the company can read it, like that is basically always going to be totally fine. But the moment you start getting into confidential data or data that's like restricted to just this part of the org or just managers or, you know, whatever it is, all of a sudden this just like load everything up into a vector database and see what happens becomes like very scary, right?
Yeah. Let's see what happens. And there's definitely the experimentation angst to see what happens, but we had to kind of measure 3 times and cut once with how we were kind of building it out. Yeah, there was a lot of excitement and the hype around AI, but you have to kind of walk in measured steps as well, even in your experimentation.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think one of the earlier versions of that bot, we were using presidential data.
Right.
So I think we had pulled biographical data of all of the presidents of the United States.
Pretty cool.
And at the time, OpenAI wasn't able to give detailed information about every president. Now it can. It can do web search and pull. But at the time it couldn't. And so that was our kind of, if it can tell us, Theodore Roosevelt's favorite, their pet's name or favorite color, this is using our vector database context. And so that was kind of how we approached the experimentation, was just using kind of basic data that is publicly available, but not really sensitive.
Very cool.
Once we had confirmed that it works and it works the way that we want it to, then we would start slowly plugging in other data, and then to varying degrees of risk as we deem it appropriate.
Right.
But yeah, that was definitely one of the earlier use cases.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And figuring out the sources of data that you're comfortable going into the AI systems and not. Curious how you sort of approached that.
Originally, I think in terms of business data source integrations, we went into Google. I think we started using Google first. And the beauty behind Creedle is it respects existing permissions.
Nice.
And so this is another win for Creedle where it just works off the bat.
Right.
We had an existing permission structure within Google Workspace that was really robust. And so we were able to integrate within Creedle and be rest assured that this was not going to interfere, or we're not going to have any edge cases where people have access to sensitive data where they shouldn't. We integrated Google first. Through that, we were able to start to branch out into kind of more sensitive data for specific teams. And then a lot of our kind of internal documentation, it is publicly available at rest. And so it was kind of this decisioning of, okay, this document's already publicly available. Are we okay then putting it to the next level and having this Copilot be widely available as well? And so that was kind of a quick negotiation with various teams. It was more of a speed bump than a hurdle. But yeah, as we started creating more sensitive Copilots, we still kind of leveraged the permission adherence that Creedle has. So we do have some use cases, I think, within accounting where they have a private bot that leverages kind of specific documents and specific data that gets updated periodically, and they didn't want that available to others. And so we're able to deploy that to a private Slack channel quickly. And yeah, it fit their use case. One other thing that I want to kind of call out on Creedle was the ability to deploy Copilots into tools that we already use, communication tools. We were able to not only consume Slack data, but also push and publish these Copilots into a Slack channel for usage, which is just incredible from a end user consumption perspective. They don't even need to leave the tools that they're already comfortable using. And that was just a huge, awesome checkbox that we didn't even know we were looking for that feature until we saw Creedle, and we're like, wow, being able to deploy to public and private Slack channels and also consume that channel history, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was like a really cool revelation for us was understanding that by living in the Slack channel, if you publish this Copilot into the Slack channel, the end user's workflow, so you mentioned the security bot, right? And you mentioned the sort of process before was someone would go into the security channel, ask a question of how do I answer this customer's question about, this compliance problem? And the security team would come in and respond to that, right? And the beautiful thing about publishing a Copilot into a Slack channel is it can just look at the messages, decide if it can answer one, and then if it can, it just gives you the answer. So the end user's experience is literally unchanged. There's no education or workflow management or change management you need to do there. You just keep doing the same thing that you were doing before, and now you get an answer from an AI.
Exactly. And this is kind of that paradigm shift of using these tools that I think a lot of enterprises haven't fully kind of understood yet. And it's this idea of institutional knowledge leaving with that engineer who's been there 8 years. And rather than just letting that leave, let's use systems and AI to augment that.
So true.
Such that, your 8-year engineer leaves and that specific playbook on how to restart your tiny cluster in a closet somewhere that no one ever touched, the incoming engineer can understand how to do that quickly.
Really quickly, yeah.
And it's transparent. To your point, they can ask the question in the channel where they would normally ask the question. And an engineer might respond, or an engineer might just say, hey, I'm going to let AI answer this one. And that's kind of a huge value prop for us.
Really cool.
And so that's a big part of why we love using Cradle.
Oh, thanks. So taking a step back, or maybe a step forward for a second. Obviously, this is kind of the beginning of 2025. We're actually unbelievably a month in somehow already.
Isn't that crazy?
I know, it's kind of disturbing, to be honest. But I'm sure a lot of people are writing like AI roadmaps. Like, how are you thinking about 2025? What are you guys trying to get done this year? Like, how are you approaching that?
It's a little bit more complex than our initial metrics we're focusing on, where we're driving down essentially human work and hours of human work. Now we're trying to focus on other metrics where we are reducing time to answers across the business.
Interesting.
And so by reducing the inherent time to answer, regardless of what team is using it, we are improving the overall business efficiency.
Really cool.
And so that is kind of a metric we're currently tracking on how teams are using AI to solve their problems and getting the time to answer lower for those cross-partner stakeholders.
Yeah. Really. What's an example of like a use case that you guys are imagining?
We have accounting is a team that interacts a lot with our CFO, and they're formulating a lot of weekly reports. And so kind of distilling that, automating that, so that they aren't manually going through Excel and publishing all of these rows. That's kind of been a focus as well.
Really cool.
Maybe some others might be insights into procurement status of software. We leverage Zip internally.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Lattice. Shout out to Zip.
I like the Zip team as well. They're also another YC startup. Great team.
Great team. Awesome product. And so getting access or visibility, I should say, to employees on the status of their SaaS software request. What stage is it in? Oh, it's in a security review right now. Rather than going into Zip and clicking through the Zip request and seeing where it's at, we've plugged in the CSV export of that Zip data to a Copilot. So people can just interact with a Copilot and say, what's the status of this?
Really cool.
15 seconds later, they get the answer, and it's reduced like click ops in a sense. And they haven't left their tool that they're in. Now they can kind of jump to the next conversation and say, hey, it's approved or ready to go. We can kind of go from there. And so that use case of taking business data from a data source, plugging it into a Copilot, and creating this NLP layer to reduce that time to answer for many parts of the business to others, is something we're exploring with a lot of different teams.
Really cool. The Zip use case is really interesting, actually, because we have another customer. I didn't even know you guys are doing that. We have another customer who's doing the exact same thing, also with Zip.
Oh, cool.
So I feel like I should reach out to the Zip team, and we should set up like a first-party integration for that, so you can get it out of the bed.
I would love that. We've built it out, and so like our integration works, and it's scalable. We've run like a daily sync, I think, in Okta workflows. But would love an official integration if you guys wanted to build that out.
Sweet, yeah. And it's always very interesting to me when I have two customers that are going through like a manual effort to set up the exact same thing. Because that tells me that there's like a generalizable pain point, and that it's important enough that it's worth like you taking your time to like actually set something up to solve it, right? Which is really cool. So I know a lot of people in the industry are thinking about like agents today. Sam Altman, obviously the brother of the founder of Lattice, is talking about this a lot. How are you guys at Lattice thinking about how agents fit into the sort of Lattice productivity ecosystem?
Very early on. We're still kind of in an experimentation phase. If the problem earlier of inputting AI into your business was understanding the specific need, I think it's even more complex for agentic AI and fitting in it. You need to be very aware of the operations of your business and where you want to insert agentic AI. Because there's a lot of opportunities.
100%.
On your sales outreach, you can have a agentic AI kind of reaching out and talking to specific potential customers. Maybe it's doing research, automated research for you about your prospects.
Yeah.
Moving over to the people side, on the recruiting side, we have a job description, and it can kind of 24 hours a day
just
scour through LinkedIn to find the candidates that you're looking for,
really cool,
and augment your kind of human resourcing on your recruiting team.
Right.
And then there's kind of other operational agentic AI. And so one of the ways we're sort of using it in Okta workflows is we are enriching the data of our tickets that come in without manual intervention. And so what that does is it allows us to get a lot more data insights about our tickets than we would just at face value if someone inserted them or created them. We can categorize what type of request this is, what app it's related to, what time of day this is. And really what we're doing there is we're kind of using machine learning, quote unquote, of AI by extrapolating more data from the ticket data that we have. And so the end result, when we did it right, is every ticket that gets created gets enriched, this enriched metadata that we're able then to kind of look back on and build out a whole data analysis and say, wow, we've really been getting a lot of these types of requests or around these types of apps. Maybe we should focus on solving problems around those things.
Really cool.
Whereas kind of the previous model of this was, oh, we'll have to manually go through each ticket and say it's this thing. And that just required hours from my team. And we've reduced those hours to now seconds automatically.
Cool.
And so another example of agentic AI, but essentially inserting it in the right place in terms of your operational workflows as a team. And that's going to be different for every team.
So true.
Yeah, it's a broad set of opportunities to insert it, but it's going to be different for every org.
For sure, yeah. And I'm also curious about how you think about the governance and compliance angle on agentic, right? Because on the traditional AI side, it's like, okay, well, where is the data coming from? Who are we giving it to? In the agentic AI world, there's a whole new paradigm of problems, which is like, what should an AI be allowed to do? Do you view that as ultimately the same question as like, what should a human be allowed to do? Or do you think these are different problems?
It's a tricky one. This is a good one. I think that it's not going to be the same.
Right.
You're going to have to balance risk appropriately. The more that compliance and risk is thought about in kind of the building of this idea and plan around inserting agentic AI into your org, the better the output will be in the long term, and the more kind of risk averse you're going to be positioning the organization. If it's an afterthought, then I think that's ripe for problems. I could think through a myriad of issues where we don't think through compliance and risk before we deploy an agentic AI somewhere. There's compliance risk, depending on where your agentic AI is located, and maybe it's transacting with parties outside of your country. If it's done 10,000 transactions accessing this data or database that it shouldn't have, and that was kind of unmonitored, then the fines and penalties can be, world stopping for some orgs. And so just coming back to this idea of, as you develop this blueprint for agentic AI, putting compliance and risk management really at the front of that conversation. It's been an interesting kind of experimentation to now kind of productionization of agentic AI for us, but it's only just the beginning. There's so much more. These models are getting better every day. OpenAI is releasing some really cool stuff recently.
Really cool, yeah. What have you played around with that you've been most excited by?
Their new research model.
Yeah, the deep research stuff.
Deep research. I am very blown away by it. I haven't been this excited since ChatGPT. Wow, with its initial launch.
Really cool.
The quality.
What have you used it for?
Mostly just freelance, personal stuff now. I haven't really used it for any business applications quite yet. But it really kind of almost setting up AI's intelligence as a service.
Yeah.
The same way that we were talking kind of earlier about electricity being just ubiquitous and being this platform that we can all operate from. What this new product is kind of seeing to me is just intelligence as a platform.
It's so cool.
And any business being able to operate from that, regardless of where they're coming from, you know, regardless of who's on their staff. They don't have these analysts, but you now have this intelligence platform that can augment that workforce. It's really fascinating times. And the same way that electricity has made way for the internet, which has made way for AI, the tower is going to continue to keep stacking, and it's going to be insane and wonderful to watch all at the same time.
So true, so true. I've used the new stuff from OpenAI twice in a meaningful sense. The first time I needed a cleaner for my apartment in Brooklyn, and finding a cleaner in New York is like such a pain because, you know, obviously it's New York, so everything's like absurdly expensive, but also like, you know, people get booked out in seconds, and you know, it's just kind of scrambling for anyone's attention, right? And I just went on Operator and I was like, hey, can you find me like someone to help me like, you know, clean the apartment on Friday between these hours? And, you know, it probably took the same amount of time that I would have taken to figure it out, but it did it autonomously, right?
Yeah.
And that was just like so cool. I'm the kind of person that hates doing that sort of task.
Yeah.
And so to have like a machine just do it for me, I was suddenly like, wow, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
And then there was a second thing later where, you know, I recently, like literally just on the way to SF today, this weekend, we did this like road trip from LA up to San Francisco. And I got deep research to like plan the trip, find the good hiking trails. I was like, look, we have the 6-month-old, so I need the hiking trails to be like manageable while I'm carrying a 6-month-old, right?
Yeah.
And it did a fantastic job. Like picked out all the right spots, found like, oh, you know, go here for a meal, go here for brunch. Like it was so good. I was like so stoked for that.
Nice.
And, you know, it doesn't completely solve the problem. Like you have to read it and you have to make adjustments and you have to like do choices, but that like kind of boring initial early research phase where you're just getting the basics together, it just solved that problem completely.
And it's really augmenting the need for us to do some of that work.
Right.
And we can focus on other meaningful things.
Right.
Like, you know, I'm sure you're able to enjoy more time with your 6-month-old.
Exactly, yeah.
Planning this whole trip. You know, the same way that we now have autonomous vehicles in San Francisco that people can take and, you know, instead of worrying about driving, I mean, you still have to be focused on driving, keep in mind. You can also do other things at the same time.
Right.
And I think that is a huge just efficiency unlocker.
So huge.
I think you and I are aligned on efficiency of one, if I do something once, I shouldn't have to do it again if it can be repeated.
Exactly.
That's like number one. And so I get really frustrated on repetitive tasks, things that I've done already. And then two, the time management component. My time is very valuable.
Cool.
And so how can I optimize for my time with efficient tools and whatnot? I think as, you know, autonomous vehicles, agentic AI, and kind of even just the operator platform, we start to see more of this, hopefully, as a world humanity, we can get more time unlocked and we can start focusing on the meaningful things.
So true.
To focus our time on.
Awesome. Okay, so last question before we wrap. So if you're a director of IT at anywhere that's not Lattice, right? Yeah. And you want to learn from the amazing work that you guys have done, because, you know, Lattice is way out of the curve here. Like basically everyone at Lattice is using AI like all the time and getting a lot of value out of it as well, right? So if you want to emulate the success of Lattice, right? What should you do? Like, what advice do you have for those people thinking about how do I drive AI adoption from like this cool tool to this thing that feels sort of transformative for my operation?
Looking back, if I could give kind of some great tips, it would be experiment. Start experimenting early. Get used to the capabilities of what this platform and many of these platforms are offering.
Right.
Get compliance and security looped into the conversation early, just so you can kind of cut through that red tape that you will inevitably get to.
Makes so much sense.
Earlier they are in those conversations, the kind of wider your playing field can be as you experiment. And then ownership. Ongoing AI ownership, kind of understanding that early on and creating that structure earlier on is also going to save your future self some work. And so those would be three things. Fourth, last thing is start to really get intimately aware with your business problems.
Yeah.
If you don't know your business problems and you're like, oh, AI is going to solve everything, but I'm not sure where my business problem, it might help me even solve my business problems. I think you're going to be on a fool's errand.
Right.
So identify those really low-hanging fruits as business operations go and focus on those and walk backwards from that. But those would be kind of all my pointers.
Cool.
In terms of evaluating great products, obviously you're watching this video, so you've taken the first great step. But yeah, I think we got really lucky with Creedle. If I could put a metaphor, it was a needle in a haystack the size of a football field.
Really cool.
And we got really lucky. There's great founders that, have a high bar for their software as well as their ideas, and putting out those ideas on the internet.
Gotta plug the team here. Like the founders, Jack and I do a very, very, very small proportion of the work that goes into the Creedle product. So definitely all the credit goes to the rest of the team. But that's very kind of you. Thanks.
Big shout outs. And last thing I'll say is just I want to give shout outs to the support of Creedle. Some of the best support I've experienced in my history of managing IT these last 12 to 13 years. It was like, oh, that's a problem for you? We'll fix it. And then, delivering these solutions, these custom solutions for us within hours to potentially days.
So cool.
Where traditionally kind of larger solutions took months to quarters. So
sometimes we get companies who are comparing us to Microsoft's Copilot. And, we talk about the support, and I'm like, look, the Creedle support team will fix your problem in the day. The Microsoft support team might get back to you in the year.
In the year, yeah.
So yeah, it's good to hear that you resonate with that. I'm super stoked. Okay, thank you so much for coming on, Alan. So good to see you again.
Thanks so much, Robin. Thanks for having me. And looking forward to doing this again, hopefully.
Amazing. And if there's anything that you want to plug to the audience, feel free. Now's your chance.
Yeah, Lattice HRIS. It integrates with Okta. It is great if you kind of want to scale out your whole performance review system and people management system, as well as integrating into your directory. So we're kind of covering all of the bases and all in one solution now. Please reach out if you guys are interested in kind of building out your people management platform at your organization. And yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks.